Troll Blitz, you need a lesson on breaking down the airbrush I'm using, the one you got a few months ago. You've got one of our Grex XGs? This one? The Monument XG? Most airbrushes are very similar. So, when you say doing a breakdown, regardless of brand, the breakdown is going to be very similar. Let's back out here from Zoom so you can see. I'll show you some of the key points to worry about when cleaning, right? So take the tailstock off, right? And you've got your needle chuck, right? So the first thing you want to do most of the times when you're cleaning before you do anything else is loosen your needle chuck, take your needle out. You'll notice that all needles will build up some paint right by where the rear gasket is. So there's a gasket at the end of the what I call the flow chamber, or the center part, the meat and potatoes of the airbrush where the needle goes through out to the nozzle. There's a gasket right here that's supposed to keep paint and liquid from going back into the air valve. Okay, so you'll see that you usually have a ring of paint there. So you're going to want to take that and just clean it off. Just grab a paper towel. Might have to wet the paper towel depending on how long it's been sitting. We just had water in this, so it's pretty wet still. Right, and just clean that off, and rotate the needle around and make sure you don't see any hot spots of darkness where there's still paint left on it, up at the tip or whatever like that. And then just very easily kind of clean it off. You want to be careful, most careful around the tip. This is a 0.3 needle, so it's pretty stout, but you still don't want to put a lot of pressure on there. It will bend. Right. So anyway, make sure you don't have anything there, and then lay that aside. You don't want to touch that. You want it to be safe while you're doing all the rest of this junk. Tighten up the tail chuck again. You don't have to super tighten it, but twist it to where it's firm again so it doesn't twist off and lose it. That's a pain in the ass. And then now that the needle's out, you can pull, depending on what brush you're using, this comes out in various ways. Ours, the spring-loaded arm on the XG still keeps the trigger in there, but you can push that back, right? This little C-arm, boom, rides there, and you can pull the trigger out, right? And then you can pull that C-arm out too. If you pull the tail chuck back, whoop, then this will come out. Okay. This has a little, it's kind of like a squared ellipse or something like that. And you see that little trough right there in the back. See that little area that looks like it's lower? It is. That end of the tail sits down in that trough. You have to pull the tail stock back, and then you let that go up in there. And that's how that goes back together. And it captures it so now it can't fall out. Right? And that's what makes the spring thing work. So just so you know, if you do pull this out for cleaning, which you should, the slot always goes in the deep end there, sits in that trough right down like that, right? And then you get that seated in there, and then you let go of this and just jiggle those around until the rectangular portion of that slide, you can see it there wanting to go in, and I just got to get it right. There we go. Oh, it's in there. I actually had it in there. It's a small part. See that end right there? Notice how it moves? You just want to pull that back far enough so that sits back in there, and then it goes through the hole. Boom, not captured. And then you pull that back, and you dump the trigger back down in there. And the trigger is bidirectional, right? So you just have the slot. Make sure that you stick the ball down in there with the slot facing backwards. Boom, get it all the way seated in there. Good to go. Okay, so that's how you do the back end of the thing. You should not have to take any of the valve apart, but over time, liquid will backflow through that seal. That seal that I was talking to you about is like right there. Okay, so there's a seal in the body right there. That seal prevents liquid from the paint cup flowing back into the valve, but eventually it will, especially if you use your finger at the front, like you pull the trigger, put your finger here, and cause it to backflow air into the cup, and it'll bubble. Sometimes that'll help release stuff that's in the nozzle. But it's also bad for your brush because it does blow paint back through that gasket and put it down in the valve. Not bad. Just realize that as you're doing it, it does have a caveat that it will help kind of blow out some gunk, but it will also push paint down into that valve. So that's the air valve, that little circle right there. That comes out by taking all of this off. So if I take the quick disconnect off, then I take the grip off of ours. Yours may not have a grip if you don't have our brush. If you do, then you take the grip off, right? And then you just loosen this with a pair of pliers. Take that off. There's a spring in there that you need to be very careful of because it will spring, and then you'll lose it. So as you unscrew this, right? Don't just and expect to take it off. Do it very slowly as you get towards the end and pull that whole assembly out, and usually like in a cup or something, a bowl, so that as you pull that out, anything that springs out of there will stay in the bowl. And what you'll do is you'll get that whole cylinder valve out, and you'll notice it has a spring and how it plunges down in there. All that'll come out. Clean it off, soak it, wipe it off. It'll have paint and gunk, and if it could be calcified if you've been in hard water for a long time, whatever. Clean that and it'll all go back. Just make a note of how it goes together. There'll be a pointy end that goes down into the valve, right? And so just make sure you put it back together correctly. It's only 2 pieces, so it's very easy. Well, 3 pieces because it's this thing too, right? But that one's very simple, right? And then when you're done with that, just make sure you put all this stuff back together the right way. That. Quick disconnect. And then up on the front, you've got the needle crown. This is magnetic on ours. So a good way to make sure you don't lose it is that you may not know, but the tailstock is also magnetic. So it just goes like that. It just sticks on the back of the tailstock. Well, mine's all gummed up with paint, but it should just stick on the back of the tailstock, right? That's magnetic too. So that'll hold it. That's what that nub is for. Okay? So you can put it there so you don't lose it, right? And then up front, just take off the cover. Okay? So this is the nozzle cover. This is where all of the air mixes with paint. You'll notice on whatever brush you've got, there's generally a bunch of visible holes or a gap around the nozzle on the side. Ours has got a bunch of holes around it. That's where the air comes through the valve, through the body of the brush, and out through those holes. And then it grabs the paint out of the end of the nozzle and like a siphon pulls the paint out, right? So this is where the paint mixes with the air is in this cap. So this has to be good and sealed. So you want to make sure these threads are clean. And that this has a nice round opening in it, right? You can see mine's kind of built up with the primer. This is our priming brush. So I want to take a little bit of water on a paper towel or something, and just kind of wipe that down. I'm going to need more cleaning than this. I'm going to need to soak it. You want to get all the paint. I usually just use my fingernail because you don't want to use anything really tough on the front of this because you don't want to mar the whole. This is one of the most important orifices on the entire airbrush is this one right here. Because a lot of the problems with fluttering and spotting of paint happens right here. If this is out of round, if there's dried paint in that hole right in the middle, right? If there's dried paint that makes it not quite round, then as air comes through, that little hole creates turbulence and the paint starts to flutter as it goes through the crown. And then you get spotting, or you get not the precise spray that you want, or you get clogging because that turbulence causes paint to dry around the edges, and that's how you get the whole thing clogged. It may not be that the nozzle is clogging, it's that this hole is constricting to the point where the nozzle doesn't matter. So just realize that can create a problem. So, and paint does over time just kind of, get bulked up on there, and it can make that not quite round. So you can get just one of we sell the little micro cleaning kit. Get that. Just a ring of pipe cleaners, right? And you can just kind of use the little pipe cleaner and put it in there and just kind of wallow it around to make sure that that's nice and round. So get any dried paint out of there. That's very important. Paint along the edges isn't a big problem because who cares? It will get dirty. It's nice to clean it, but it doesn't really matter. There should not ever be paint in here, but you might notice sometimes that you get a little bit of dried paint if you've been using a long way. I let this brush sit with white transparent paint in it. And so the white transparent paint kind of overnight came through the needle opening and dripped down into the bottom of there. So it would be a good idea for me to take this and come back from this direction. Right? I do the same thing. Just kind of get it in there, twist it around, and get all that white out of the end of the nozzle. That's mucho bettero. Because that whole area really does need to be free and clean of any kind of debris. Right, so now I've got rid of that white halo that was at the end that was just a little bit of dried paint. And then you're done. That one should be easy to clean. The nozzle, you just take off with a tool. I'm going further along this than I thought I would, but hopefully this helps. And like I said, this is good for damn near any airbrush. Some airbrushes will have a nozzle that seats in here and doesn't have to be unscrewed. It's just pressure fit. This cap locks it in, like the Badgers. So some, the Harder and Steenbeck has like that. So you don't necessarily have to have a tool that takes a nozzle out, but a bunch of them will. Iwata, ours, Grex, all of them, right? So you'll take the hex end of this tool, put it on here. Do not horse this. If you got ham hands and everything you do is you know, Neanderthal strength, give it to somebody else. Give it to your daughter and say, hey, twist that real quick. You know, because if you just crank on this, you can bust this little chrome over brass nozzle and you can break the threads off in there. So I just loosen it, break it over with that. Now I have tape on my fingers. This is a real pain in the ass, right? But I just break it over with the wrench, and then I unscrew it with my fingers to make sure I'm not, you know, jumping threads or anything like that. There you go. Nozzle's out. The same thing with this. Now with the nozzle, you never want to do anything other than if you have like a spare needle that's bent. You don't really ever want to do anything that pushes out the hole of the nozzle. Right? You want to do all your cleaning inside the body. If you throw an old needle in there, then that old needle can come out the nozzle. But again, that's a little risky because if you push too much, you flare the end of your nozzle and it will never seat around the needle again. And you'll wind up with a problem with sputtering and not being able to have your airbrush really be a dual action. If you flare the end of the needle, every time you press the button, you have the opportunity for paint to come out because it won't seat around the needle even when the needle's at the full extent out. You can push the needle out more, but if it's flared, now it's no longer round necessarily, and so your needle will extend out more, which means as you pull back, you won't ever get that fine spray, and you might wind up getting it to where you got spray all the time. So just be careful. Try not to extend anything out the nozzle when you use the brush. You just want to put the brush in there. You don't want to push it out. You just want to push it in there until it doesn't move anymore, and then just twist the nozzle around on the brush. Don't you know, with the brush. It's also good to use the next size up, so it's a little bigger one. Get it damp. Just dip it in my water cup real quick, and then put that in there, right, until it doesn't push anymore. I'm not jamming it on there. I'm just going to where it gives back pressure, and then twist the nozzle on there. Let the brush do the work, but not having to agitate the brush in there. And then once you've twisted the nozzle for a while, then you'd kind of give some pressure on the cleaning brush. You kind of push it down so it's pressing up against the side of the nozzle, and then pull it out. So it kind of, and then put it in, and then push it towards the top and pull it out. Then put it in and push it towards one side and pull it out. Then put it in. If anybody's getting horny, that's your own problem. Push it towards the outside and pull it out. Okay? By doing that, now you've pulled out anything that's on those walls, right? And kind of clean it. And then you just go in there and twist it around on there again and repeat. Just kind of as you're pulling out, make sure you're putting downward, upward, sideward, reverse pressure on there so you're getting everything out of there. Okay? Now you'll probably have some loosened up garbage in there, because the brush isn't going to grab it all and pull it out. So simply take your clean out dish, get your eye cleaning bottle that if you don't have an eye wash bottle, buy one. Amazon, $4, right? And because I have tape on my fingers, this is an absolute travesty. So I'm gonna switch my hand around the other way, right? And so hold it between your fingers, put the bottle up to the thick end here and just squeeze. It's gonna be messy, but it's gonna blast water through there, right? Then put it to where the nozzle goes into the bottle. You'll be able to get it to stick up in there, and then squeeze there, and it won't be near as messy this way, right? But it'll blast some water out the other direction. And hopefully that then blows out all the loose chunks of whatever was in the nozzle. And like I said, you shouldn't have huge chunks. The brush will break it down, and paint doesn't turn into rocks unless you've had this thing, you know, sitting nasty for a year. Then all bets are off. If you have paint boulders in your brush, you may need to just buy a new nozzle. But that's why we sell nozzle kits, right? But we've already gotten like big chunks of stuff coming out of there. All right, once the nozzle's clear, once you've got all of the rest of the stuff disconnected, you want to take the next step up in the brush, which is this one. They're very easy to recognize. Blah, blah, blah. And again, before you put it in here, dip it in your clean water, which my water's not clean, but whatever. And then you just insert from this direction, right? And push that all the way in, right? And then pull it out. Push it in. You can twist the airbrush around the brush. Again, don't try to twist the brush. These really thin steel, stainless steel handles will bend and warp. So just get it in there, hold it, and twist the brush around, or twist the airbrush around the cleaning brush is what you need to say. And then again, just like the nozzle, just kind of press it towards the side, pull it out. See that? Got a big chunk of paint just flicked out, right? Rinse that off if you see big chunks of paint coming out. Shove that back in there, turn the brush around it, Push towards the other side, pull that out. It's flicking shit everywhere. And again, just keep doing that. Right, and that will get the inner guts of the raceway where the paint goes. That's where the paint flows. And then at some point you'll be able to, if we can see down in there, right, you'll see the brush actually go through that chamber. And then you switch down to the smaller side, the one smaller size that we were using. Right, you'll put that in there. And mine's all bent up. Okay, they're there. So I don't know if you see that. If you can see that. See, the brushes, let's see if we can get it in there. See it moving down there? And you want to get it to where you can have it go into the back side of the race like that. So it just went past the cup. Now it's like down in here, right? And then insert it as far as you can there, and then pull it out, right? That's going to now get that paint that was built up towards that seal out. You don't want to jack around back in there because you don't want to poke the seal or anything, but you can shove that back in there. Again, you can turn the brush, the airbrush around the cleaning brush, right? And then pull it out. Because one of the biggest things that will give you problem with your airbrush is paint building up back at this seal. If it starts constricting that, as the needle wants to pull through that seal, it'll get really tight. So when you're pulling the trigger, sometimes it'll feel like you're spraying, but the needle's sitting still because the chuck will loosen and just drag around it. So make sure you clean all that. While you have it apart now and you've loosened all that paint, again, take your clean out bowl, which should never be as full as mine is right now, right? And with the airbrush facing down, so we're not just spraying water back this way because we don't have a needle in there, so the water will go everywhere. You want to try to keep it out of the valve up here, right? With it facing down, just kind of lightly squeeze some water in there and get all the loose bits out, like so. You don't have to dry it or anything. I typically then just go ahead and put the nozzle back on. Use your fingers to tighten the nozzle until it doesn't tighten anymore. Very, very important here. Use your fingers to tighten the nozzle until it doesn't tighten anymore. Put the wrench on it. You should only have to give it about not even an eighth of a turn, right? So it's tight there. You just want to hold it. You want to just kind of bump the nozzle a little bit and then quit. Notice I didn't grab it and go, "Rrr." No, you just kind of bump it a little bit. You've got it as tight as it needs to go with your fingers, and then you just bump it a little bit to seal it up. That's it. You'll know if you start spraying and it's not spraying properly. Take that off, bump it again, right? But don't ever go, you'll bust that nozzle off, okay? Then before you put the needle in, go ahead and put the nozzle cap back on. Bam. You can go ahead and take your magnetic crown off of there, put it back on there. I would suggest cleaning this, because mine's dirty as hell, by the way. But it still works. Okay, everything's clean, everything's in there. Loosen your tail chuck up. Grab your needle. I use my finger to guide the needle in so that I don't just jack the needle into the chuck. Push that all the way in. It should be nice and smooth. Take that off to make sure that as you get the needle out the end properly, don't push it up in there too hard. You push it in there till it stops, then you tighten the chuck, right? In this case, oh, we forgot to put the trigger in. Derp. Take that back out. It would be nice that the trigger works. Unfortunately, the trigger cannot go in after the needle's in. Take this, again, pull the spring stock back. I showed you how to just take the end with the slot. If you're using this particular brush, put it into the trough there, let that slide back, that's captured. Pull that C mechanism back like so. And then put the trigger back in. It's in there. Make sure it pushes down and pops back up. That means your valve is good. If the valve has got paint in it, it might stick. You push down, the button doesn't come back up. You probably need to clean the valve. But as long as you're pushing down and it's popping back up immediately, it means all this spring is clean and that this is working good too. You push back and it does what it's supposed to do. Now you're good. Now, take the needle with your finger to guide it. That all the way up through. Again, don't push. It'll stop itself. You'll see it sticking out the end. That's good. Bam. Close that up. Tighten it nice and tight. Pop that tailstock back on. Crown back on so you don't bend your needle like a fool. And then give it a good run. You might want to leave the crown off so you can see whether or not the needle is moving. You see the needle going in and out like it's supposed to. Got good action, doesn't feel like it's sticking. Boom, you're ready to go. Ta-da! Clean airbrush. There you go. That's how that works. Follow that. I will highlight that and throw it over on YouTube so that you'll always have that to go look at. And I think we did pretty well, minus me forgetting to put the trigger in. But I'm not going to redo it. You're stuck. You're stuck with that problem. Leaf, that's our XG. That is the Monument Grex XG. The TG cleans exactly the same. The valve is different. Getting to the valve on the TG is different, and obviously you do not have to remove the trigger. If you're using the TG, everything I just said is the same. On the TG, you will loosen this nut here, whap, and then the whole handle comes off, whoop, and then the valve is up top just like it was before. So then you drop the valve down that way, okay? It's just that this slide doesn't have to come out. This slide, if you ever feel like that slide is sticking, then you can undo this portion. So like when I take this off, right? Notice that I can then take this piece off. And when I take this piece off, the entire tailstock or the entire spring assembly, right, in the chase comes out. There's a big spring in there, so you got to be careful. You pull that out, and you can get this whole slide out and clean it if you feel like when you're pulling your trigger, it's sticking somewhere along it. But it should be nice and smooth. You would have to do something belligerent to get a bunch of paint back into that, like dip it in paint or spill it all over it or something. Generally, that's really good. This slide is very, very heavy-duty steel. It's chromed. It's very good. It lasts a long time. It shouldn't rub or give you any problems there. But if you do, you just untwist this, and then that whole assembly comes out the tail. Clean it, shove it back in there, tighten it back up. You're good to go. All right? That's the only difference between the two brushes. The front end with the nozzle, the cleaning the race, the nozzle cover, everything else identical. Right? Same thing with the tailstock with releasing the chuck. It's all the same. Chuck's a little shorter here because of the length of the body. So you notice you have a shorter tailstock, but same exact stuff.